Good morning, everyone. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as the Jonathan Fanton Director of Roosevelt House. And on behalf of Hunter College President Ann Kirshner, I'm delighted to welcome you all. I'm going to take 1 minute just to say how appropriate we think this space always is to host policy discussions. Because 90 years ago, a few floors above this auditorium that was carved out of the old family kitchens in the Roosevelt Mansion, 90 years ago, the presidential transition of 1932 and 33 took place in the tiny room that FDR had used as his library from 1908 for the next 25 years. And it was in that room that the foundational building blocks of the New Deal were first explored and eventually put together. And 90 years ago, in 1933, New York State Labor Commissioner, social justice pioneer Frances Perkins walked into that room knowing that she would be offered the job as Secretary of Labor. And sure enough, so she came prepared, as smart women leaders do, right? So FDR, as expected, said, "Frances, I want to make you the first woman in the cabinet ever." And she said, "Governor, I'd love to do so, but only if you agree that I can work on," and then she listed her priorities: minimum wage, maximum hours, disability protection, workman's compensation. And she said, "Oh, and most important of all, can we find a way to replicate what we began to do in Albany, old age pensions," as she put it. So we just always remind people that we have the honor not only of spawning the first woman cabinet member, but also the Social Security program that was born upstairs. And with that, it's an honor always and a pleasure to welcome your host and my friend, ABNY President Melva Miller.
Thank you, Harold. And I mean, every time I come to this space, I learn something new about what was done here to make not only this city great, but this country really great. So thank you. It was the perfect opener. Thank you, Harold. I really want to thank everyone for joining us this morning for the newest installation of our ABNYChats series. Today, we are so lucky to hear from two of New York's most important government leaders, who really engage us in a conversation on the status of a landmark piece of legislation and investment, really, right, that carries really important implications for New York. As Harold said, it is really fitting that we are holding this here at the Roosevelt House. You know, I was introduced to this building by the former president of Hunter College, Jennifer Rabb, and I had the pleasure of serving as a Grove leader in this building. And it's really a pleasure to sort of host this conversation in this space that really garners so much importance to our nation. Just want to give a shout out and thank again Harold Holzer for opening up. We also have with us Terry Deutsch, and we have Cynthia Vance, if you could just stand up. Two very important VPs at Hunter College. Thank you. And thank you for lending this space as always. So the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act, also known as the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, is really a once-in-a-generation investment in our country, right? And it really has the potential to grow and build a safe, resilient, and equitable transportation future for New York. This federal infrastructure bill is the largest long-term investment in our infrastructure and our economy in our nation's history. It provides $550 billion over fiscal years 2022 through 2026. This investment not only represents much needed investment for the city and the state, but it can be a turning point, really, right, to right historical wrongs and really pave the way for equitable progress across many of our New York communities. New York, a state renowned for its diversity and its dynamism, now stands at the precipice for major transformation. This legislation offers us the unique opportunity to rejuvenate our infrastructure, reinforce our economic backbone, and really cultivate the future for opportunities for all New Yorkers. The federal infrastructure bill, which is unprecedented investment in roads, bridges, public transit, broadband, is a vital instrument really in creating a level playing field and to ensure that the entire city and state can participate in its prosperity. However, this bill is not just about bricks and steel. It's about investing in the well-being of every New Yorker, regardless of their zip code, their background, their circumstances. It's really about connecting historically disenfranchised communities, reducing the burden of transportation costs, and ensuring that everyone has access to the opportunities our city and our state provides. It's about revitalizing neighborhoods. It's about supporting affordable housing. It's about ensuring the economic growth and benefits of all New Yorkers. This bill at its core is really about forging a more inclusive and sustainable future. It's about reinforcing our resilience against climate change, safeguards our coastlines, and transitions to a clean, renewable energy sources. It is our collective promise to ensure that the next generation inherits a better New York. The legislation provides investment that transcends partisan lines, something we need today, but it also transcends geographical boundaries and ideological differences. You know, Harold talked about sort of smart women leaders and what has happened in this building. So it is really a pleasure that we have two very important women to give us an update on this very important and historical investment. We have Kathryn Garcia, the Director of State Operations and Infrastructure for Governor Kathy Hochul, and we have Meera Joshi, who is the Deputy Mayor for Operations for Mayor Adams. So if you can join me on the stage, ladies. Thank you. So a little bit about these women if you don't know them. I'm sure everyone in this room knows them. Kathryn Garcia, the Director of State Operations and Infrastructure for our governor. She oversees numerous state agencies and authorities. With over 14 years of government experience, she previously served as the Commissioner of the New York City Department of Sanitation, where she managed sanitation services, environmental programs, and implemented innovative technology solutions. During the pandemic, she also served as the COVID-19 food czar, delivering over 1 million meals a day to New Yorkers. You can give her a round of applause, right? Wow.
And every single one of those folks had an opinion about the food being served.
Of course, yeah. Before that, she held key roles in water supply management and disaster response, including during Hurricane Sandy. And if you didn't know, she also ran for mayor. Meera Joshi serves as the Deputy Mayor for Operations, responsible for New York City's infrastructure, public realm, and climate efforts. Her teams focus on expanding green spaces, reducing emissions, and ensuring infrastructure resilience while providing core services like trash collection, very important, and clean water. Before her current role, she was nominated for Administrator of the U.S. DOT's Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration and held leadership positions in transportation regulation, including Chair and CEO of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission. She also has experience in transportation consulting and academia with a background in law and a BA from the University of Pennsylvania. Director Garcia and Deputy Mayor Joshi are responsible for the implementation of this very important and historic infrastructure investment in our city and state. And we are so lucky to have them here with us today to give us an update. So with that, Deputy Mayor Joshi, if you want to take us off, thank you.
Sure, it's on. Good morning. I'll just start off by saying this is a great format. I don't think I've ever done something like this where we sort of trade on and off questions and we get to have cheat sheets at the same time. It's a beautiful thing. But also, I just want to take a moment to recognize that Kathryn and I have also done this in her backyard. Yeah. So there's something really beautiful about being able to have a relationship that is easygoing, informal, and real with your counterpart at the state level when it comes to fundamental things like operations. So I treasure that, I appreciate that, and I think we both look as leaders, especially women leaders, to foster that in our teams and all of their colleagues across state, federal lines and across other industries. Because it certainly is, as you mentioned, Melba, these are bipartisan issues. These are about working together, and they're for the common good. So it is really, thank you for memorializing what we do informally in a way that we can sort of show the world. So I really appreciate that. But I'm going to start with the approach to federal funding. So New York State's approach to federal funding, as Melba mentioned, the New York City and New York State are getting record amounts of dollars as a product of the bipartisan infrastructure law in both formula and competitive grants opportunities, and through the IRA. So what is the state thinking about this historic injection of funding?
And I'm thrilled to be here as well. And as much as it's fun to be hanging out in the backyard, it's also great to be with all of you. And I want to thank Harold and Melba for having us. I also want to thank President Biden and Majority Leader Schumer, because without that, we would not have this money. And it is really, you have to look back to probably the 1950s about how transformative this will be for the United States and for New York State. And the perspective of this state is really multifold. So as Melva mentioned, we want to make sure that we are distributing money in a way that is equitable, that really changes the direction of where the state is going through the prism of, there is this thing called climate change. I don't know if anyone noticed on Friday, but also taking care of the little things. Not everything is going to be a ribbon cutting or a great gigantic multi-billion-dollar project. There are a ton of things, both within the city and across the state, that are unnamed culverts or bridges that have to be repaired as well. And so thinking about that and thinking about how we can also leverage the federal dollars with additional state dollars so that we can move money more quickly. We have seen, and this dates back to probably when we last had some additional infrastructure money after the financial collapse, being able to get things out the door is incredibly important to show the public that we are doing everything to make their world better. So it is a broad array of projects with an eye towards climate change, with an eye to state of good repair projects. I know that we both probably think those are pretty important. They're not important until they fail, and then they get really important and make your life really miserable. And thinking about how we can also reconnect communities. A lot of the bigger dollars that we are going to spend are about making sure that we are not leaving people behind in the world of broadband, that we are not recreating the world of dividing communities with highways. Probably the furthest along in the state of New York is unfortunately not in the city of New York, but is up in Syracuse. And if you go up and stand under the I-81 viaduct and cross between the two of those communities, it is literally could be in a textbook of the classic way in which we created harm with infrastructure. So making sure that we don't do that again and take this opportunity to correct that, but also just deeply invest in where we're going. So I'm actually excited, but it's a little daunting because we know that we have to succeed. So now I get to ask the question, right? I know that you have been working with the federal government, and you've launched sort of this city's interagency federal infrastructure funding task force. How are you thinking about that from the city perspective?
So I feel like I got the best of both worlds. I was with the Biden administration as we were drafting the bipartisan infrastructure law through the late night negotiations and through the ups and downs and maybe today and finally getting there and celebrating with the secretary and all of the transportation team when we finally were able to pass the law. And then came to city government just in time to start getting the money. So I felt like I had a clear mission, right? I knew what we were there to do. And I really fundamentally believe that our approach had to be somewhat different than in the past. And in the past, there's been a sense of the pie is only so big, be very curated about what you apply for, don't have agencies work against each other, only one agency can apply for the grant. And we knew, I personally knew, and as Kathryn just mentioned, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event. This kind of money is not going to be available for funding core infrastructure. Hopefully it will be in the future, but we don't know. The election is still an unknown. But the importance of really being all in was not lost on me. So what we did was we took all of the agencies. We have about 50 agencies, 200 members, about 50 what we call loyalists that come every week. And we every week go over what the opportunities are. We ensure that there are multiple applications for every opportunity, which completely defies the logic of the past. It's turned out to be productive. We're actually having agencies win. Instead of competing with each other, they're sometimes both winning. And it also really provides an atmosphere of collaboration that allows agencies to work together on grant opportunities, making them more creative, making them stand out, and also helping to address some of the fundamental core of what the bipartisan infrastructure law is really meant to do, which is reconnect communities, focus on Justice 40, think about resilience and climate in our infrastructure. And when you combine agencies, you really get that effect. So I'll give like one example, like NYCHA is a housing authority. They won a RAISE grant, which has typically been a transportation, because they're gonna put safe e-bike charging and secure e-bike parking on NYCHA campuses. But that wouldn't have come about, I don't believe, unless we had this constant weekly circle of everybody exchanging ideas. And I think one final benefit of that is it's also a critique session. So everybody has to show their proposal, and we all get to poke holes in it before we send it to USDOT, where they will poke holes in it. So it's a few rounds beforehand. It's really, I think, also been rewarding for those that are partaking in it. We can see the dollars coming in. There's a level of competition, and it really helps us focus on aligning the administration's policies with how we're going to, which fortunately aligned perfectly with the bill's priorities. So it has been a rewarding process. We've got a lot more grants pending, so we're in no way done. We're really in the midst of working and building that muscle so that as a city we consistently going forward approach grant opportunities in this manner. Now I ask you a question.
You gotta
This
ask me
is
the
the
question.
awkward part that we probably, So one of the key areas of funding is around transportation and transit. What projects are being advanced primarily because of this injection of federal funding? What are the priorities projects for the state? Oh no, I end there. Now you start at telling me what your transportation projects are.
I'm going to start with perhaps what will be the most transformative project in the country, which is Gateway. It is responsible for probably 20% of the U.S. GDP, but it is a phenomenally ridiculously expensive project. The current estimate for the tunnels is about $17 billion. And even in a state where we spend a lot of money on infrastructure on the day-to-day, that's a big number. It has a complicated funding stream, and it has a complicated governance structure. I do not know if we could get this done without, there have already been significant commitments from the federal government. They committed $6.8 billion in one grant, another $292 million in another grant, and then there's like a small grant. And in addition to that, we have applied for another $3.6 billion under another program, which is competitive with other projects on the Northeast Corridor. But when you think about that amount of money, where New Jersey and New York will still be on the hook for billions of dollars, you don't get this done without an infusion of federal money. And I want to thank the governor, my governor, but also the governor of New Jersey for being willing to work in partnership, because we would not be getting this done if when we came into office, we didn't refocus on it and say, we've got to get all these documents done. We've got to build an organization to deliver. Like we didn't have a CEO of the Gateway Development Corporation when we went forward, but that is one of the biggest pieces. But some of the others are like, and the MTA will be putting out their 20-year needs assessment, I think today. There are some big projects that make transit better for New Yorkers. There is the Penn Access Project, which pulls Metro North in to Penn Station. There is the Second Avenue subway. Goodness gracious, we are going to get that done. And of course, we want to make sure that everyone has a restored Penn Station and it's not a rabbit warren of hallways where literally they're dead ends. Like you can't actually freely move through and break down the different fiefdoms, I would say. Is like the floor where the Amtrak trains go, or it's different than the floor where the MTA trains go, which is different than the floor where the New Jersey Transit trains go. And think of it holistically and more regionally. But those are some of the things that we are thinking about. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, in some of our bigger projects is Kensington and reconnecting communities, the I-81 viaduct and reconnecting communities, and then, of course, looking here in the city of New York at the Cross Bronx Expressway and reconnecting communities. And then we recently did, and we'll talk more about it, a joint grant application for BQE and reconnecting communities. I mean, a lot of this is trying to figure out how to get all of that done. But to make a plug for CUNY and for Hunter College, the two things that have been shown through research that provide economic mobility is great public universities and great public transit. Because you get the skills and then you get access to a huge labor market. And so you are able to really leverage what you have learned. If you only could get across town, it wouldn't be enough. You can get everywhere in the region. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about. Okay. Now I have to ask my question.
Yes.
We're going to get the hang
Yeah,
of this.
we may never get a job in the movie industry, but
So actually, we'll go right to the BQE, the
yes.
cantilever. The thing that seems to want to fall down. How are you thinking about it? Where are you moving in that? I know that we have some role, but I know you've really been driving that piece of it. By the way, if anyone doesn't know, there's this crazy thing about the built and unbuilt highways in New York City. So some we own, some they own. I think the FDR is the most crazy, where they own one side, we own the other side. If you're a transportation geek, we can get you a map.
Yes, so I guess our end goal here is to have it built so we can give it back to you.
Yeah. Right, that's one of the things.
Yes.
Once they do that federal money, then it becomes my
Yes,
responsibility.
So this is, in thinking about the bipartisan infrastructure law, and, the president talks so much about how we have to be competitive, we have to invest in our crumbling infrastructure. That's an artery for, economic growth in many regions. You have to think of the BQE and the triple cantilever. 130,000 vehicles, about 13,000 trucks. It's certainly a regional artery for our transportation network and our freight movement in the area. Whether we like it or not, people have different opinions about whether it should or shouldn't be, but it is. And it was built to last 40 years. It's been described as an IKEA shelf, which doesn't last very long. And it is, it's highly monitored, so it's safe. We're doing repair work as we speak over the next couple weeks. It's probably one of the most monitored structures on the East Coast. But it is beyond its useful life, and it would be, I think, a shirking of responsibility as a community if we didn't face that. And there are those that have, big ideas about tunneling it, getting rid of it altogether, hoping the traffic would go away. But the truth is, it's with us, the traffic, and people still want to, hit yes on the card on Amazon. So trucks are going to continue to move around, and New York is tremendously dependent. Though we can make strides to change that, our reality is that we need the BQE and we need the triple cantilever. The state owns most of it. We own this 1.4-mile stretch that is the triple cantilever. And so the Adams administration has said at the outset that we were going to take a full corridor approach to this. We're going to both look at what needs to happen right now on reconstructing the triple cantilever, as well as planning, just as we're doing on the Cross Bronx, about how to reconnect communities that have been ripped apart when the highway was originally built. And doesn't surprise anyone, it was the same architect of the Cross Bronx as was the BQE, Robert Moses. And like the Cross Bronx, houses were raised as the highway ripped through communities. People that used to be able to walk to the water could no longer walk to the water because a highway was in between. The physical construction of the rest of the highway is in decent shape. It is really the triple cantilever that needs to be addressed. If it is not addressed, there will be in the future a time when trucks have to be diverted. It's not exactly an area where you want to divert trucks and ultimately divert more traffic. So we, together with a really strong and I think precedential partnership with the state and the federal government, have been able to work together to start public engagement on ideas around reconstruction. We're put in a grant application together for infra-mega reconstruction dollars for the BQE cantilever. And I want to point out, again, you know, this is the thing that made this bill possible was the fact that Republicans and Democrats ultimately care about whether bridges and roads fall apart. In New York, even if we're all Democrats, governors and mayors don't always get along. But on this critical issue, and because we do happen to have a governor and mayor that do get along, a problem that has really stumped prior administrations because of the constant feud between state and city is now able to move forward. It's as much credit to the engineers that are thinking about how we do reconstruction as it is to the mindset of my staff and Kathryn's staff working together day to day with a broader goal in mind. So I'd really want to highlight, you know, we have to have productive government, and this is a perfect example of that. Productive government with a poster child for the bipartisan infrastructure law because it is crumbling infrastructure. So our hope is that we are successful in our grant application. We have funding already earmarked to move forward on it. We'll begin the environmental review process early next year. And as soon as that's done, and it's now limited to 2 years, thank God, we'll hope to get it underneath, we'll move on to construction. And in the meantime, we'll continue with the monitoring, and we'll continue with the outreach and really robust both design and engineering concept development, because it is an unusual place to do construction. You're between a park and a historic promenade with very little wiggle room. And so really bringing the best and the brightest minds to this problem is absolutely vital. And in addition, we'll be working, we put in another grant together, another precedent of cooperation to do planning for both the North and the South, like with the Cross Bronx. How can we cap some parts of that highway? How can we cover up some parts of it? Under 3rd Avenue are some of our most dangerous intersections in the city, crossing under the elevated portions of the BQE. That's no easy feat. You do sort of say a few prayers, look both ways, say a few more prayers, and go. It shouldn't be that way. Doesn't have to be that way. We're going to make sure that we work with the community on how to bring those spaces back to life. And so that's a planning grant that's was submitted just last week with USDOT. And between these two grants and continued cooperation, it's a way for us to really stitch back together a community that has been torn apart between Brooklyn and Queens. And we're simultaneously doing the same work in the Bronx with the Cross Bronx. So these highways that were built for economic development, finally, this many decades later, are getting a new look, really thanks to the infrastructure bill and the opportunities that it brings. Now I think I ask you a question.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it's, I just also want to give people a perspective. None of these projects are easy. All of them are incredibly complicated from a community standpoint, from an engineering standpoint, from a constructability standpoint. And to try and do them all at one time is really a testament, one, to the fact that we have the opportunity, but two, to really needing cooperation regionally and between particularly state and local government.
Oh, actually, I think you asked me a
Oh, I'm
question
asking you a
now.
question?
Yeah,
Oh,
about
so how are you incorporating They gave me the questions. So sustainability with the new competitive grants and like thinking about those. I think you've talked about some of these, but I think love to hear more.
Yeah, so I mean, we're threading, whether we like it or not. I don't think you have to be a climate person. It's just a realist now. We're threading resiliency and emissions reduction in all of our work and prioritizing it in our grant applications. So some examples are the NYCHA example I gave you, which is e-bike infrastructure. We've put in for over $30 million for fast charging infrastructure. We will be obviously taking full advantage of the IRA's opportunity to give us rebates for things as far-flung as solar power on low and middle income residences, upgrades in our NYCHA buildings, our city fleet as we turn that EV. This is an interesting opportunity because in the past, localities have not been able to access rebate dollars like this. So this is really going to be able to allow us to stretch our budget in a way we haven't in the past. We did get a raised grant earlier this year to do planning for 6 greenways around New York City. That adds 150 miles of bike and pedestrian pathways. Again, that's mobility for New Yorkers, but it's also getting people out of cars and getting them to use their feet. It has all kinds of health benefits as well. And as you know, we've got our local law 97 requirements, so we'll be required to lower buildings emissions, but taking advantage of opportunities in the IRA as well to help accelerate that. And all of our construction projects are going to be led through something that we highlight in our grant applications, our Clean Construction Executive Order that was recently issued by Mayor Adams, really prioritizing the use of low-emission construction vehicles and construction components that have a smaller carbon footprint. So challenging the industry and challenging people that are going to do business with the city to use those techniques in how they bid and then how they construct. We make markets that way. We're fortunate enough to be big enough in New York City that when we start setting standards with our vendors, it really forces them to set those standards in a larger market. And we work together, obviously, with cities across the nation and internationally. And as more cities do that, it again makes the market larger and brings the prices down and also makes it part of our regular construction requirements. So I think these are all really wonderful ways that we can weave this into the way we do business. And it's also essential to our ability to have projects that will withstand the test of time. I think I ask you a question now, the way it goes, but let's see. Okay. How can we use federal and state funds to make housing more resilient?
So to build on what you said, and this is actually an interesting area within not that I would say anything critical about all of this money pouring in. There isn't actually building money for housing. There are not additional low-income housing tax credits or some of those more traditional methods. But there is a lot of funding to make buildings more sustainable. And so when you think about, not that we weren't doing a lot of this, if you would like a heat pump or solar, go to NYSERDA's website. Lots of state rebates already in place, and that is how we are thinking of leveraging the federal dollars that we have applied for. So it's probably going to be about $1 billion that come into the state for these programs. One of them will be an energy efficiency block grant, so we'll be able to use that to pilot programs. NYSERDA has a solar for all, $400 million for low and moderate income folks, as well as our traditional weatherization program. But the weatherization program can now do thousands more homes. And this is really complementary not only to what the president and the majority leader were looking for in this bill, but also what the state and obviously New York City was doing with their local law, but the state has some pretty significant goals to meet in the CLCPA, and so had already been moving forward on a lot of places with state dollars to begin the conversion to what has to be our future, which is being climate resilient and lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. All of these, I think the governor's like, on Friday, how many emergency orders have I had to do since I came into office for weather? And I was like, 8 in 2 years. You know, she's done some hurricanes, some blizzards, and, you know, it was terrible here on Friday. It was a 1,000-year flood in the Hudson Valley the month before. And so we are seeing the impacts, and, you know, you're going to pay now or pay later. You either make the infrastructure better and try and reduce our footprint, or you're going to have to rebuild because Mother Nature will break things, as we have all seen. And, you know, another line from my prior world, water finds its level. You can try and channel it, you can try and constrain it, but if you're not thinking about how to make our spaces more environmentally friendly, i.e. greener, we're all going to spend a lot more time in waiter boots. Ask you a question. Alrighty. So this sort of building on that, when we all saw by the way, the video that went viral of the corner with the 3 feet of water and the swirling whirlpool, yeah, that's my corner. It's not the first time that it's happened. I could give you a whole dissertation about what the infrastructure problems are there. Very hard to fix, though. Unfortunately, the subway came in the 1900s and sort of cut off sort of some of the drainage. But I digress. So obviously, the flooding across New York clearly shows the continuation of climate change. How do you think we could benefit from sort of federal and Army Corps investments, and how do you think we can be leveraging those?
Thanks. So, I mean, I think one of our challenges of the many is the weather is the changes are happening much faster than we can build infrastructure to deal with it, and it's always like this hope game. I think about, like, we look at our the East Side Coastal Resiliency Wall, and we're like, it's going to protect against the 100-year storm. It's like, but what if the 100-year storm comes next year instead of in year 99? Like, our wall's not built yet, you know? So we're constantly pushing. And one of the realities, and Kathryn knows as well, is our sewer system, our stormwater system cannot absorb the kind of downpours that we're seeing, and it never will. We won't be able to build a underground pipe system to do that. So our challenge is, how do we make our city more like a sponge? How does every acre of land have a dual purpose that it serves, whether it's public space, it's roadway, it's parkland, it's a bridge, but it's also able to absorb or hold water. And so we do things from blue belts, which are like sort of the lakes that can hold water, to cloudbursts, which is a basketball court or a playground that can also double as a holding tank, to absorbent asphalt, absorbent pavers. But we have to be pushing. And all of that is actually really hard to do in New York, even though it's not as hard maybe as building a new pipeline underneath. It's still very difficult, but we're constrained with federal funding caps at like $50 million a project to build, for example, a blue belt. And it costs a lot more than that to build something like you see in Staten Island, which is amazing. It works, and it's also beautiful for the community. So understanding at a federal level that dense urban environment, we have a tremendous downside when we have a climate crisis, and the complexity of solving the infrastructure is also tremendously expensive. And so we can't be subject to the exact same caps as the rest of the country, or at least cities and rural. We need to look at how much harder it is to do deep infrastructure change in a dense environment. One of the other things, which I think is critical, is we get formula dollars for transportation, we get formula dollars for housing, but we really need formula resiliency dollars, so that at a state level and at a city level, we're not hoping every year that we'll win another grant so we can continue a project. We know that we can depend that we're going to get a certain amount of money. There may be some variability depending on politics on how much there is, but at least we know that that stream will be consistent. And these projects transcend politics, they transcend election cycles, they continue on and on and on. And so the necessity for having reliable funding streams at the federal level is really important in order for us to plan and stick with those plans. Because half of it is starting the project, getting through the complexity and the policy, it means sticking with it. And having the funding is really half the battle in order to keep that endurance muscle up. So I would say that. I would also ask that we get a little bit more money for every state in clean water and drinking water state revolving fund. We currently can access the loans. We do have a slight disagreement. We think we should access the competitive grants too, but we're not allowed to right now because it's for populations that are smaller than 300,000. But I think really the bigger picture is understanding at a federal level that this needs to be a consistent funding stream, and we need to size the infrastructure grants to the actual circumstances of the localities they're going to, especially in complex urban infrastructure environments. Now it's my turn. Okay.
I would say that, like, one of the challenges I think that both at particularly in the coastal areas, is you are often dealing with different funding streams from different parts of the federal government and the Army Corps. And that intersection, getting everyone to line up, is really tricky.
Talk to people on Staten Island.
Yes.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned Army Corps, and that is a challenge, right? Because it's not only the funding, but who's doing the work. And we may want to do the work a lot faster than the Army Corps wants to do the work. And that is a problem for us in the Rockaways and Staten Island. The HATS study just came out, and that is, maybe years and years away, but long-term resiliency around the New York region is something that is still being planned at that level and will take an enormous amount of coordination to understand the variety and diversity of the New York City region. I think I get to ask you a question now, which is about the state is making its own contributions to resiliency and climate change. And to show how much New Yorkers take this seriously, the voters passed the Environmental Bond Act. How will the Bond Act be used to invest in resiliency?
So for anyone who voted for the Environmental Bond Act, thank you. So we will have $4.2 billion available across the state. There has been, through this entire summer, an ongoing listening tour about how to use it. There were some buckets, but very broad buckets, but the beginning of the project development is just happening. And so there will be about $650 million for clean water. Some of that will be for municipal stormwater, some will be for drinking water. There is a lot for resiliency, mainly to deal with things and do matches for these federal programs for coastal line, shoreline rehab, and for waterfront rehab. And this is also in addition to the fact that the state is putting $500 million in for water and has, probably for close to the last 10 years, to continue to make sure that we are ensuring that everyone has clean drinking water and is, not walking in sewage, those two things being bad. And so we view it as like we are making the investments. The people of New York State have come forward and said they are willing to pay for significant changes. The legislature and the governor have put significant money into our programs, and we will have federal money that comes in behind, but it is making sure their projects are incredibly expensive. The blue belts are beautiful, but some of them took years and years and years to get into place. And during those periods of time, people are experiencing real damaging health impacts or quality of life impacts. And so how do we do it faster? How do we make all these grants line up in a way that really drives success for the people who are living through this? And things are rapidly changing. If you bought your house and you're like, I didn't need flood insurance because how would I expect that there would be a torrential rainstorm? I'm not near a coast. Unprepared for, and even eyes wide open, this is not where that happens. They told me about coastal flooding. They didn't tell me about interior rain flooding. And so we are really thinking about all of those pieces in the Environmental Bond Act, and then one that you will definitely, I'm sure, be taking advantage of, there is a tremendous amount of money for electric school buses, uh, and making sure that we are protecting our youngest lungs from diesel fumes, and also protecting our environment at the same time.
Yeah, and we are proud that we were able to work with our school bus vendors who got, I think, about $18 million to electrify school buses. To electrify our entire fleet takes a lot more money, but it's certainly the beginning, and we'll continue to, help them compete for those dollars. And I just want to reiterate what you said about the starkness of it. We have, I don't know if anybody's been out to Jewel Avenue. I'm sure you're familiar.
I've been to Jewel
Yeah.
Avenue. It's not the first time it's flooded.
It is.
It's spent some quality time on some places
a
there.
neighborhood where you can barely realize you're in New York at times. People are on septic tanks. They're living in flooding, but it's the kind of place where a Blue Belt investment would make a huge difference to an entire community that has lived with flooding on a daily basis. Because even on good days, there's flooding there. We've been able to do some interim work, and we've invested $75 million that we're going to be putting into helping the infrastructure there. But there's parts of our city that are uninhabitable, and I think we need to really reckon with that and put the dollars where they need to go to ensure that people can have the basics of life.
Yeah, and the reason it's called the Jewels, they're all named after like ruby, emerald. That's why they're the Jewel
It's also
Streets.
called the Hole.
Well, it is called the Hole because it's below the elevation of any place around it. So it's a
Yeah.
bowl. And as I said before, water will find its level. And so on a sunny day, it looks great. But when it rains, it's going to fill up your basement or your first floor and put your car underwater and more or less make it nearly impossible to live. And it's not the only place in the city that has septics.
Right.
You go to Douglaston, they have septics. Go to Breezy, they have septics. Go to Staten Island, they still have septics.
Mm-hmm.
You would think that all of New York City had sewers, but that is actually not true.
So now I get to ask you about broadband. The bipartisan infrastructure law takes a broad view of infrastructure, and that includes broadband infrastructure. How is the state accessing these funds? What is the state doing to help New York City residents and upstate New Yorkers access these funds?
I think that everyone learned during COVID that having connectivity was not sort of a nice thing to have, but absolutely critical for everything that you do. Whether or not that was education or your job or any type of service, everything moved online, and your inability to access that online activity really meant that we were leaving people behind, and particularly communities of color. And so there are two ways that the state thinks about broadband. One is the wire there? So is there the last mile situation? And the second is affordability. And so under the law, there is discounted broadband available for New Yorkers on income. And we've been able to get 1.5 million New Yorkers signed up. So we got to do a little bit better because California and Florida are still ahead of me. But we are pushing to make sure that where there are, and this is particularly true in New York, most places do have the physical wire to get to broadband, that the real barrier is the cost. And goodness gracious, like the cost of broadband is insane. If anyone's ever checked their bill recently. And the second way that we think about it is around how do we get that last mile? And there are parts of New York State that are incredibly rural. So we are, again, leveraging state dollars. We are doing a $1 billion program. We will get BEAD funding through the federal government for about $665 million. We will put in another $300 million, and that is also going to be working with all of the utilities who provide services across the state to do that. And there is an interactive map. One of the things that was interesting about this particular program is everyone assumes they know where the broadband is. And there were not great data sets on who had and did not have access. So we did pulled the data from the utilities, pulled the data that we had, but then allowed you to say, well, they say that it's available, it's not available. I cannot get it. And actually ended up getting more money for New York State by showing that there were more holes than what the utilities had said there were. So it is working to make sure that we are funding that infrastructure going forward. But we've also done some fun things. Well, I think they are fun. This is a big state. We do a lot of stuff. So the New York Power Authority, which is the largest public utility in New York State, primarily transmission, not retail provider, pulling all the power from our hydro facilities upstate. Oh, by the way, we have fiber cable that we're running on our poles too. And they're running past all these places that don't have access, like Steuben County. And I was like, well, why can't we run the wire the last mile and start giving these homes access? So they're little projects because these are little places, like maybe 1,000 homes, maybe 500 homes. But it is a way for us to think creatively, not only about the money that we're going to need to do this, but also about how do we leverage the other things that we're doing to get access more quickly. And it is different than downstate. Upstate, I don't know if any saw the horrifying murder of someone who went up the wrong driveway and was killed. They could not get cell for miles. For miles and miles, they could not get cell. They could not tell anyone that there was a problem. And that is true across many places in New York State. So our focus is, what are we doing about affordability? And what are we doing about making smart investments to ensure that we are getting that last mile? And it is not only about access. We've got to have access for participation in this economy, but it is also for safety reasons.
And although in New York, our issue isn't so much the infrastructure, it's around affordability, we do have real pockets of lack of access just because of that affordability gap. And I know like 40% of our CUNY students don't have access to a laptop. So being able to supply those devices and partner with the equity funds that the state is standing up to make sure that it becomes affordable, because that translates into job opportunities and economic mobility. And the other side of this is the job opportunities that are created in a world where there is better access to broadband.
This is going a little bit off topic, and so I'll put it so I see folks in the audience. I think that one of our biggest challenges will be, I think we've overcome a lot of the ability to coordinate, and the federal money is one of our big concerns at the state is the workforce piece. Not only having the construction folks that we're going to need, because this will produce thousands and thousands of jobs, but the engineers and the environmental assessments, and we are competing with
China.
Well, I was going to say the cooler industries of, tech. And there are not as many people who want to be the bridge builder as want to design like whatever that Sphere thing was doing in Las Vegas this past weekend. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us who work in this area to be thinking about it as broadly as that, and making the connection, like, here are all the things we need to be successful. And how are we also ensuring that there's equal access to those opportunities as we really push forward? But I could get up and we could talk water and sewer all day long, some bridges.
But I mean, you started out with the transportation link to economic mobility, but transportation and broadband access are the stepping stones to the jobs that you've described, right? So if we don't have those building blocks available for people in the region, we're not giving our own people the opportunity to rise up to those jobs. And so I think we can't think of these things as
disconnected.
Separate. They're absolutely linked. They're good for today, but they're also good for the people that we need to be building and running New York tomorrow. And hopefully we're creating those opportunities through giving them this foundation.
Absolutely.
All right.
Oh, Melva's doing this.
Oh, okay. That wasn't on my paper, though. Yeah.
Okay.
So here at ABNY, we are a membership of diehard so much, right? And we're always looking for opportunities to partner with government to make our city and our state better. You talked a lot about competitive grants, and public-private partnerships are really effective and really popular. And I think, understanding how our membership can really partner with both of you in both of your offices, especially as you apply for more grants. We have infrastructure folks in the House. We have, National Grid and Con Edison in the House. If you look at the airports, I know this is not relevant for this federal bill, but, Delta has been an enormous partner at the airports in investing, private money into redeveloping. So we have Turner Construction in the back. We talked about, construction workers. So how can we really, how can our membership really work with you guys on the competitive process or really be helpful in making sure that New York gets the money it really needs from this infrastructure bill to continue this growth?
I'll go through a few quick things that come to mind. Number one, support letters are always great, so that's helpful. Number two, and this is a little fuzzier, but we try to bring industry members into our task force weekly meetings so we can get the perspective of the construction industry, for example, on how nationwide they're dealing with the influx of dollars and how to prepare for that. So it's really important for those of us writing these grant opportunities to hear how the industry that's going to do the work once we win the money, how they're preparing and what they need and what's really important for them in these grants. And the third way, you mentioned public-private partnerships. We have a lot of opportunities in the bill and IRA to work with private sector. I always, like when I worked at TLC, I was like, we can do a lot of things. We can't build an app. We never should. We're government. Like we know what we can't do. Let's stay away from it. I think EV infrastructure is an area where we don't need to build it. We're government. Like there's a lot of really good partners out there. So we're pushing to really, what we have is the land. So making city property available to partner with those that can do EV infrastructure really well, and so that the citizens of New York City can all get the benefit of being very, very close to a fast charger in the next few years. So I think everywhere we know that it takes a special skill set to provide the infrastructure benefit. We need to make sure we put our pride aside. We don't need to own that thing. Partner with private industry and get it done to produce for New Yorkers. And then finally, I would say just sort of also the idea generation. I think that gets back to coming to talk to our task force. As agencies, we try to think we're open-minded in the city, but we may not always be, right? And you all may know a lot more about what's cutting edge on a certain project, and we need to make sure that we're schooled on that. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, both formally in the programs to have public-private partnerships, especially if there's revenue splitting. It makes it a lot easier for us to get involved, and it makes it beneficial for you. And then also that sort of idea sharing and then the planning for how we're actually going to implement projects are three ways that I would say absolutely welcome your participation and look forward to. One last thing, maintenance. This is just the thing. We do a lot on public space, but really trying to figure out how we can work. And this is something I think we look both for in the philanthropy, but also in partnerships. We can build things, but we really have to build in maintenance schedules with them, because without that, nothing looks beautiful forever unless it's cared for.
I think you need to talk to OMB. I'll very briefly add to that, as of course, like we have done some phenomenal P3 projects at the airports, and that is LaGuardia and that is JFK. It might be a little bit from a moment where it's going to be a little bit disruptive, but it will be worth it in the end. I promise you. And that is something we are looking to do across the planet. It is so much money, and even the matching funds that we're supposed to come up with are still ridiculously huge. But Meera's right. Like, technology in construction also is changing, and oftentimes we're writing grants thinking like, okay, we need this much steel, or we're gonna do it in this way, and we got to cut open the whole street. But maybe there's a better way for us to be looking at this, and that can inform how we really move forward. Yes, definitely can always write your your congressman or your senator, thank them, ask them for more. Always ask them for more. But it is, I think, an opportunity for us to continue to work together. We are very open-minded at the state around how we can continue to do that. And we don't need to have pride of like, we figured out how to do everything perfectly. It's not always true. So.
Well, I thank you for that, because if it's one thing our members do and they know is they know what they know, and they'll let you know what they know. So I think you'll have a long list of folks who would like to speak to you about how we can partner. So I'd like to ask questions from the audience. Sure.
I'll project. Sharon Levy from the YMCA. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for
We need the mic so we can record.
Hi. Sharon Levy from the YMCA. Thank you for being here, but also thank you for everything that you both have been doing for years. I wanted to ask, and perhaps broadening on that partnership lens for just a second, nonprofits, libraries, hospitals, universities have all had to struggle just a bit to change or refit some of their buildings as it relates to the resiliency legislation and regulations that have passed over the last few years. And I'm wondering, has there been discussion, in addition to some of the things NYSERDA is doing, will there be opportunities for us to access some of the dollars and the resources that this bill brings to the city?
So I'll do at the state level. Like there's actually an infrastructure grant about to go out from DASNY right now, which is the Dormitory Authority of New York State, in case. I hate when people do acronyms I don't know. And so there are opportunities available for the nonprofits there. For the hospital specifically, there is capital money that will go through the Department of Health. And then, of course, in all of the pieces around what NYSERDA is doing, there are opportunities, particularly for anything that's going to lower emissions. And then as we get into it, the Environmental Bond Act, as we begin to go through and delineate the actual projects, and that will be a piece of it. I don't think it'll be the biggest piece. I don't want to oversell, but there will probably be opportunities there.
And I would just add, I know, Local Law 97 is it's a good cloud and a black cloud, right? For those that have to implement it. The recent rules came out around sort of what efforts you're currently making, and that we really want this program to be about culture change, not about penalties. But a lot of the work that's done to get into compliance with that law, we're happy to talk to you. There's the accelerator, which provides technical assistance, but also availability in IRA for rebates for the work that's done, and our City of Yes zoning opportunity is looking at changing it so it's easier for you to do things like adding solar panels. So I think both from a technical aspect and then working with building owners on what pots of money are available, because it's not always completely, immediately clear where you go and what qualifies and what order you do things in. Some are rebates, some are grants. So I think that's a place where the city wants to provide technical assistance through the accelerator. And so please, take a card, reach out to us. We want to make sure that the number of buildings that have to comply with Local Law 97 is large, but it's not overwhelmingly large, that those that need help should and deserve that sort of curated discussion with government to understand what their obligations are and what assets are out there to help them get there.
Questions? Anyone on this side? Andrew.
Hi, Andrew Hallwick with Millhouse Engineering. First of all, I want to say we're so fortunate to have all three of you in the civic space, and government's really, really terrific. And I'm not going to ask you anything you don't already know, but I do have a question. We have all this money coming to us, and we talked about a lot of really visionary opportunities we have in front of us. But as a veteran of government, I do wonder if you've given thought to collaborating to make it easier more cost effective, faster to get these things out of the door. You were sort of speaking to that a little bit earlier. And how can you collaborate to make it?
You want to talk about your former role, Andrew? At DDC?
I obviously was part of thinking about making construction more efficient at the Department of Design and Construction, but it's in capable hands now too.
So, I mean, we've been working really well with the governor's office on capital process reform. Many of the items were in the governor's budget and were successfully passed, changing insurance, reducing threshold, e-bidding instead of electronic bidding instead of paper bidding. This session, we're really pushing towards alternative delivery tools, so progressive design build, CM build, CM at risk, and again, working closely with the governor's office and with the controller and industry, all going up to Albany together to lobby for the flexibility that so many other jurisdictions have. It's almost odd that we, the city that actually has every reason to, every challenge in front of us that will slow down construction, yet we have none of the tools that would help us overcome those challenges, including DDC as an authority, which you may be a supporter of, but certainly, we look to MTA, SCA, they're able to do things with a smaller budget, with much more flexibility, increasing the MWBE participation, and generally before deadlines. That if the rest of the city was given that kind of flexibility, we would be able to do. So wish us luck on the next session, but that's certainly a focus of the Adams administration, is to make sure we can build faster, better, and under our time constraints.
And we are very supportive of trying to make things faster. From my prior world in the city of New York, every time we seem to have had a challenge, whether or not it was a scandal or something else, we added another layer of rules, and another layer of rules, and another layer of rules, to the point where if you want to actually get to controller registration, it's a year. And I remember the first time when I was at NYCHA, they had gotten their first chunk of city capital money, which works very differently than the federal capital money. And they put it in certain years, and I was like, there's no way if you're in design here that you're going into construction in 9 months. That's not going to happen. And they're like, could not, because they had lived in such a different procurement world, could not get their mind around it. But I know that within DDC, there have been some really interesting things around incentives that have been helpful in terms of getting things done, holding our utilities accountable in street work for getting things done. But at the state level, be able to experiment. We've been doing design build for quite a while now. It has been very successful, partly because when you turn it over at 30%, the contractor is incentivized not to put, gold bars all over this piece of infrastructure, but actually make it functional. And then we want to continue to support the city, to support our other municipalities, and to support ourselves in the big construction projects.
And when we go to Albany to lobby, a lot of what we hear is, well, there'll be no accountability, we'll be back to the corrupt battle days if you give agencies this amount of flexibility. But what we learned through COVID, when we had emergency authority to build without so many restraints, is that the world, it fell apart in different ways, but it didn't actually fall apart in terms of construction. Going back to MWBE, we were able to expand MWBE, and we were able to build in record times. I know, Kathryn, you lived through that, so you can attest to that. But that has given us the ability to demonstrate in real projects what these other tools can bring to construction in New York City.
We'll take one last question. Patrick, sorry.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks for all you do. Patrick Jenkins, I work with several infrastructure clients, but I'm also a resident of Southeast Queens, and thanks for what you're doing to try and adding a fourth lane to the Van Wyck parking lot. Expressway. I'm sure you've all experienced it. But wanted to ask about also we have to rely on things like commuter vans and other alternative transportation means, and wonder if there were any more plans for things like IBX or other light rail projects, maybe to make us much less of a transportation desert.
Well, IBX doesn't quite get to you.
No, it doesn't.
But it should make your ability to move between Queens and Brooklyn much better, and it is something the governor is very committed to, and is scoring very highly on the 20-year needs assessment because of, for those of you who don't know, more or less goes through Brooklyn like a backward C and connects all of the different subway and rail lines, and makes everything much more efficient. So we are very committed to thinking long-term and getting that project done. Southeast Queens has been a transportation desert, but I think that one of the things that the MTA did was the city ticket, so that you can actually get on the Long Island Railroad very close by and pay the reduced fare, which we think is critical. If it's passing through your neck of the woods, we want to make sure that you can get on it and not pay the much higher fare. And of course, in Southeast Queens, very familiar with the challenges you have with water, particularly with groundwater. When Southeast Queens also wasn't part of New York City's water supply till 1996, and actually had their drinking water from groundwater. When they got connected, we stopped pumping the groundwater because it was sort of dirty. Except that then the groundwater table started rising. Shocking. And so now there are houses that are basically built below the groundwater table that really struggle. And so it's both a stormwater and a groundwater issue in Southeast Queens. And I know that the city has put billions of dollars into sewers, and there still are billions more. And I know the state wants to be supportive of that as well. But I'd say that the city ticket, and yes, we are all in on IBX. So hopefully the MTA and the state and the legislature can all work together to make that happen.
Thank you.
And we'd probably like some federal money for that too, for anyone who's in.
Yes. Well, you can count me in for the letter to the federal government for more money for Southeast Queens. Can we give our speakers another round of applause? This was amazing, and I'm so happy you guys accepted our invitation, and hopefully you can stay around for a couple of questions from the audience. Yeah? All right. Thank you, everyone.